less than 1% of Americans are aware of the Sultana shipwreck, which is believed to have claimed up to 1,800 lives. But what if I told you there are shipwrecks even more devastating than the Titanic that no one ever talks about? While the Titanic is remembered as the greatest maritime disaster, there are other wrecks even more horrifying, yet they remain largely forgotten by history. These tragic events resulted in the loss of thousands of lives in unimaginable ways, leaving behind haunting stories of chaos and despair. Why have these catastrophes been hidden from the public eye? What truly happened on these fateful days? Join us as we uncover the chilling details of shipwrecks far worse than the Titanic. MV Donus, December 20th, 1987. Just 5 days before Christmas, the MV Donus, a passenger ferry, embarked on its journey from Taban Island to Manila, crossing the Tabla Strait in the Philippines. It made stops in Catbalogan and Samama, carrying many passengers returning home for the holidays. Under Captain Uzio Nazareno's command, the voyage was progressing smoothly, with the ferry expected to arrive in Manila by 4 a.m. the following day. But disaster struck, and no one could have foreseen the tragedy that was about to unfold. Originally built as an oil tanker, the Donus had been converted into a passenger ferry with a capacity of 1,518. Despite this, safety standards were poor, and the ferry was severely overcrowded, with an estimated 4,386 people on board, nearly 3 times its allowed capacity. This would prove catastrophic. Around 10:30 p.m. that night, near Dumali Point in the Tabla Strait, the Donus collided with the MT Vector, an oil tanker carrying gasoline and petroleum. The collision sparked a massive fireball that engulfed both vessels, turning the Donus into a nightmare. Many passengers were asleep at the time and awoke to flames consuming the ferry. Survivors, including Philippine Constabulary Corporal Luado Neo, reported that the lights went out immediately after the crash. Life vests were locked away, and the crew was in a state of panic, offering no instructions or organization. Within 2 hours, the Donus sank, followed by the Vector 4 hours later. A passing ship, the MS Don Claw, witnessed the explosion and rescued 26 survivors, 24 from the Donus and 2 from the Vector. Tragically, all crew members aboard the Donus perished. The death toll reached 4,885, making it the deadliest peacetime shipwreck in history. An investigation revealed that key crew members were absent from the bridge, instead relaxing in the recreation room. The disaster highlighted grave negligence and poor safety measures, with many passengers illegally boarding and not listed on the manifest. The wreck of the Donus was discovered in 2019, lying at a depth of 1,600 feet. MV Wilhelm Gustloff. The Wilhelm Gustloff disaster, often overshadowed by other maritime tragedies, remains the deadliest shipwreck in history. While it is often categorized as a military transport, the majority of its passengers were civilians. The tragedy claimed more lives than the Titanic, Lusitania, Britannic, and other notable disasters combined. Built in 1936 as a cruise ship for German workers, the Wilhelm Gustloff was repurposed during World War II as a hospital vessel, and later became a stationary barracks for U-boat crews in Gdansk, Poland. As the war neared its end in January 1945, the advancing Red Army prompted Germany to initiate Operation Hannibal, evacuating civilians and soldiers from East Prussia by sea. The Gustloff, with a capacity of under 2,000, became one of the evacuation vessels, overcrowded with over 10,000 people, many boarding out of desperation or through bribery. On January 30th, the ship departed Gdansk, but later that night, 3 Soviet torpedoes struck, causing it to sink in under 70 minutes. Many passengers drowned, froze in the icy Baltic waters, or were crushed in the chaos. The disaster claimed an estimated 9,343 lives, including German civilians, soldiers, and Nazi officials. Only around 1,200 survived. Overcrowding, freezing temperatures, and the decision to illuminate the ship, making it an easy target, contributed to the high death toll. For weeks afterward, frozen bodies washed ashore, serving as a chilling reminder of the disaster's enormity. SS Eastland. On July 24, 1915, the worst shipwreck in U.S. history occurred when the Eastland, a Great Lakes excursion steamer, capsized in the Chicago River, claiming 844 lives. Despite cool, damp weather, over 2,500 passengers and crew crowded onto the ship for a company picnic. The Eastland was one of 5 ships chartered for the event, with more than 7,000 tickets sold. Most passengers were employees of Western Electric and their families, eager for a rare Saturday off. As the ship filled up around 7 a.m., a drizzle started to fall, and many passengers sought shelter below deck. The main cabin was lively with music, and passengers on the upper deck leaned against the railings or jostled for spots. As more boarded, the ship began to tilt to one side, but this wasn't immediately alarming to the crew or observers on land. By the time the last passengers boarded, the tilt had eased, but soon after, the Eastland tilted even further. Water began flooding the open gangways into the engine room, and crew members scrambled to the main deck as the ship's situation worsened. In less than 5 minutes, the Eastland had tilted to a 45-degree angle. Panic ensued as a piano rolled across the promenade deck, nearly crushing 2 women, and a refrigerator pinned another woman under it. The cabins below deck quickly filled with water, turning the scene chaotic. Despite having sufficient lifeboats and life preservers, the ship's overloaded upper decks and modifications designed to increase speed and capacity made it top-heavy and unstable. The Eastland rolled onto its side, throwing passengers into the water or forcing them to escape across the exposed hull. By evening, 844 people were dead. The grim task of recovering bodies continued into the night. Lula, September 2002. September 2002 marked a tragic chapter in African maritime history when the ferry Lula, a 260-ton vessel, became the site of the continent's deadliest shipwreck. The Lula had set sail from Zwinkop in southern Senegal, bound for Dara, the capital city. It usually made the 300-mile journey twice a week, but after nearly a year of engine repairs, it resumed operations with a single trip each week to test its newly fixed engine. Despite the limited schedule, demand for tickets was high, and on September 26th, the Lula departed with 1,863 passengers, over 3 times its intended capacity of 580. As the ferry left port, it was clear the ship was dangerously overloaded, visibly tilting to one side. The mood on board was lively at first, but disaster struck around 11 p.m. when the Lula encountered a severe storm halfway through its journey. Although the ship was typically able to handle rough weather, the overcrowding made it dangerously unstable. 5 minutes into the storm, the Lula rolled over, with the bottom of the vessel surfacing above the water. Many passengers survived the initial capsizing, but were trapped in small air pockets within the overturned ferry. The crew was caught off guard by the rapid tilt and failed to send a distress signal in time. It wasn't until a survivor launched flares that nearby fishing boats began to assist, rescuing some passengers from the water. Official rescue teams didn't arrive until the next morning, but by then, the ship had already sunk. 16 hours after the disaster, 1,179 lives had been lost, and only 64 survivors remained to tell the harrowing tale. SS General Slocum. On June 15, 1904, Manhattan's Lower East Side was alive with activity as the working men of Klein Deutschland, Little Germany, prepared for their workday. Shortly after 9 a.m., a group of mostly women and children from St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church boarded the General Slocum for their annual end-of-school outing. The passengers, excited for the trip, boarded the largest and most magnificent excursion steamer in New York, waving flags and singing along with the band. The children played on deck while adults chatted and enjoyed the festive atmosphere. By 10 a.m., the General Slocum departed the docks, heading up the East River toward Long Island Sound for a picnic spot on the North Shore. There were approximately 1,350 people aboard, including crew and catering staff. Built in 1891 and owned by the Nika Steamboat Company, the General Slocum was a large wooden vessel made of oak, locust, and yellow pine, capable of carrying up to 2,500 passengers. A fire inspector had recently declared its fire equipment to be in good condition. Disaster struck around 10:15 a.m. when the crew noticed smoke rising from below deck near 97th Street. They rushed to the second cabin, but they were unprepared, having never conducted fire drills. When they tried to use the ship's fire hoses, they burst due to rot. Panic set in as the crew reported to Captain William Van Shake that the fire was out of control. Fearing the strong currents and potential damage to the ship's steering, the captain decided to keep moving, hoping to reach North Brother Island. But the wind rapidly spread the fire, engulfing the entire vessel. Panic spread among passengers, especially mothers desperately searching for their children. Hundreds jumped into the water, many unable to swim, while the life jackets were rotting and ineffective. Rescue boats arrived, but mostly found the bodies of children. A large yacht from the New York Yacht Club appeared but failed to assist, and Captain Van Schaik did nothing to intervene, simply watching the disaster unfold from the bridge. Despite the efforts of hospital staff on North Brother Island to prepare for rescue operations, the extreme heat made it impossible to approach the ship. Though Captain Van Schaik managed to beach the General Slocum sideways, it was too late for many. Firefighters and medical personnel worked desperately, but by the time help arrived, countless lives had been lost. This became the deadliest maritime disaster in American peacetime history, claiming 1,021 lives, mostly women and children. Among the survivors was a 10-month-old boy who was orphaned but later identified by his grandmother, and 11-year-old Willie Kepler, who had snuck onto the ship without his parents' permission. He survived by avoiding the panicked crowd, but couldn't return home until he saw his name among the dead in the newspaper. The tragedy devastated Klein Deutschland, tearing families apart. Funerals stretched over a week, and the once vibrant community of Little Germany was left in mourning. Many widows and broken families relocated uptown to Yorkville, forming a new German community, while others chose to return to Germany. Over time, Klein Deutschland faded into history, replaced by waves of Polish and Russian immigrants in New York City. SS Kianga. The Kianga was a small coastal passenger ship, weighing just over 2,000 tons, that began its journey from Nanjing with an overloaded load of around 2,150 passengers, far exceeding its official capacity of 1,200. In early December 1948, the ship docked at Shanghai's Shiliupu dock, where even more passengers, including stowaways and crew members' friends, boarded. On December 4th, the Kianga departed Shanghai, bound for Ningbo, about 200 miles to the south. Late that evening, as it passed out of the Yi mouth, roughly 50 miles northeast of Shanghai, the ship was rocked by a massive explosion at its stern. It quickly settled on the riverbed, with only the upper decks, funnel and masts visible above the water. The lower decks flooded rapidly, and the radio room was destroyed before a distress signal could be sent. It took over 3 hours before a passing steamer spotted the first distress flares and alerted local authorities. Smaller boats arrived to rescue passengers stranded in the wreck, many waist-deep in water. Around 700 people were saved, but many others drowned or succumbed to hypothermia before help could reach them. The death toll remains uncertain, with estimates ranging between 400 and 4,000 due to the unregistered passengers. More recent estimates suggest around 3,250 passengers were on board, with over 2,300 presumed drowned. Initially, the ship's owners blamed the communists, speculating sabotage from a mine or bomb. While US naval authorities supported this theory at first, later evidence indicated that a mine likely caused the explosion, though its origin remains unknown. Despite splitting in two, the Kianga was salvaged in 1959, renamed Dongfang Hong, and continued operating on the Yangtze River until the early 1990s. Taiping steamer. On the eve of Chinese New Year in 1949, tragedy struck as people scrambled to flee the turmoil following the Red Army's victory. By nightfall, the docks were crowded with passengers eager to escape, and the Taiping steamer, with only 58 tickets available, was overloaded with around 1,500 people, including wealthy travelers, stowaways, and friends of the crew. The Taiping set sail for Kyong Harbor at 4 p.m., but 7 hours later, while drifting through the dark sea, it collided with the smaller Chuan steamer near the Joan Archipelago. The collision, occurring in pitch darkness, left little chance for survival. Of the 1,500 passengers, only 37 survived, including military officials, National Assembly members, and wealthy merchants. The victims' bodies were lost to the sea, leaving behind devastated families. Years later, survivors recalled the horrors. A 92-year-old survivor, Yang, tearfully described searching for his wife in the stormy waters. The story of Professor Xian Jing is particularly poignant, recounting how Li Xuan survived by clinging to a wooden box after losing his wife, struggling to stay afloat as others perished. The cause of the disaster remains disputed. Some blame the overloading, while others point to crew negligence. Retired Captain Lin Chang Liang believes overloading was the primary cause, citing martial law that forced the ship to sail without lights, making it nearly invisible to other vessels. In the stormy, dark waters, the chances of rescue were slim, but nothing was more tragic than being trapped aboard a sinking ship. SS Pacific. On November 4, 1875, tragedy struck off the coast of Washington Territory when the sidewheel steamship SS Pacific, en route from Victoria to San Francisco, collided with a freighter called the Aurus. The collision sent the Pacific sinking rapidly, its wreck now more than 1,000 feet below the surface. Captain Jefferson Davis Howell of the Pacific had only 2 of his 3 crew members on duty as night fell. The ship was already in poor condition, listing heavily, leaking water, and with the lights out on the port side. Captain Charles Sawyer of the Aurus spotted the approaching Pacific but couldn't maneuver fast enough to avoid a collision. The Pacific struck the Aurus 3 times before the crew sounded a whistle and reversed the engines, but it was too late. The Pacific's starboard planks buckled and the ship quickly filled with water. The lifeboats were in disarray and difficult to launch. Only 2 passengers survived, Henry Jelly and Neil Henley. Jelly's lifeboat capsized immediately after launch, but he scrambled onto the bottom of the overturned boat with 4 others. Most of the women aboard drowned. Jelly and 1 other man managed to climb onto a floating piece of the pilot house, but the other man succumbed to exposure. Jelly was eventually rescued by a passing ship near Vancouver Island. Neil Henley, the sole surviving crew member, said most lifeboats were filled with water. He launched a boat with 15 women and 6 men, but it capsized instantly. Henley swam to a piece of the deck with 7 survivors, including the captain and first mate, but all were washed away or died from exposure. Henley was the only one found alive later. An inquest revealed that the Pacific's hull was rotten and unseaworthy. The Aurus was blamed for crossing the Pacific's bow, and the Pacific crew was deemed negligent. Captain Sawyer, charged with manslaughter, faced no punishment. 2 days later, the Aurus was lost after running aground. The Pacific wreckage was discovered in 2022, rumored to contain a strongbox with $79,200 in cash and $100,000 in gold. SS Princess Alice. On the evening of Tuesday, September 3, 1878, the Princess Alice, a paddle steamer, was travelling up the Thames from Sheerness to London. Passengers enjoyed the pleasant evening as the vessel rounded Tripcock Point and entered Galleon's Reach. Ahead, they noticed a large vessel, the Bywell Castle, looming nearby. On board the Bywell Castle, pilot Christopher Dix realised too late that the Princess Alice was steering directly towards them. He ordered the ship to stop and reverse the engines at full speed, but the collision was unavoidable. The Bywell Castle struck the Princess Alice near her starboard paddle box. Panic broke out as passengers on the Princess Alice scrambled toward the gangways. The Bywell Castle lowered boats, lifebuoys and ropes to assist survivors, but many in the water drowned. Around 35 people were saved by the ship, and about 28 were rescued using the boats. Thomas Haar, the Bywell Castle's master, reported that after about 10 minutes, the cries from the water ceased, leaving only bodies and debris. The water was heavily polluted with sewage from nearby Barking Reach, making it foul and smelly. Bodies were brought ashore at Beckton Gasworks in London and the Plumer Workhouse Infirmary. Among the dead were the wife of the Princess Alice's manager and their 4 children. The Princess Alice broke into 3 parts: the forepart, the afterpart, and the boilers. A diver reported that the cabins were filled with bodies crowded around the exits, likely trying to escape. On September 7th, the forepart was raised. The exact number of casualties is unknown, but it's estimated that 640 people drowned, making it Britain's worst inland waterway disaster. An inquest and inquiry found both vessels at fault. The Bywell Castle was criticised for not reacting quickly enough, and the Princess Alice was deemed negligent. In 1883, the Bywell Castle disappeared off the coast of Portugal, a tragedy largely forgotten until later years. HMHS Britannic. The HMHS Britannic, nearly identical to the Titanic, was a massive vessel measuring 882 feet in length and weighing over 53,000 tons. However, following the Titanic's tragic sinking, the Britannic received several design improvements, including a double-skinned hull near the engine rooms, watertight bulkheads raised to 40 feet above the waterline, and advanced lifeboat davits capable of launching multiple boats at once. Despite these enhancements, the Britannic's journey was short. On November 21, 1916, just a year after its completion, the ship was struck by disaster while en route to the Greek island of Lemnos. As it sailed through the Key Channel at high speed, a German-laid mine exploded near its bow. The blast flooded 6 compartments, exceeding the ship's survivability limit. Open portholes worsened the situation, letting water into the upper decks. Captain Bartlett tried to beach the ship on a nearby island, but the damage was too severe. Lifeboats were launched, but several were deployed prematurely while the ship's propellers were still turning. 2 boats were sucked into the blades, resulting in tragic loss of life. Witnesses described chaos as survivors clung to debris or swam away from the sinking ship. In just 55 minutes, the Britannic sank. Of the 1,066 crew and medical personnel aboard, 30 lost their lives. Remarkably, many survived, including Violet Jessop, who had also survived the Titanic disaster. Her escape from a lifeboat destroyed by the propellers became one of the most vivid accounts of the tragedy. The Britannic now rests off the coast of Kea, while the remains of past wreckages continue to be found, with the stories of survivors often seeming more like myth than history. The Essex. One of the most gruesome shipwrecks in history occurred 200 years ago, when the Essex, a whaling vessel, set sail through the calm waters of the Pacific Ocean. The crew's goal was clear: to catch fish prized for their meat and oil. On a mid-June day, Captain George Pollard Jr. decided to take a small group of crew members in a whaleboat to track a large school of tuna, leaving the rest of the crew aboard the Essex to conduct repairs. Suddenly, as the crew scanned the horizon, they spotted a massive sperm whale swimming just beneath the surface. It was about 85 feet long, a looming predator that created immediate unease among the men. Without warning, the whale charged at the Essex, crashing into the side of the ship with a powerful lunge. The collision sent shockwaves through the vessel, causing chaos among the crew. The whale struck again, this time tearing into the side of the ship, creating a breach that allowed water to flood in. Panicking, the crew hastily lowered the remaining whaleboats, filling them with whatever supplies they could grab: navigational tools, canned food, and water. But the Essex quickly sank beneath the waves, and the men found themselves stranded in the vast ocean, far from any land. Captain Pollard initially wanted to head toward the closest islands marked on their maps, but some of the crew were hesitant, fearing that the islands might be inhabited by hostile locals. Instead, they made the difficult decision to drift southward, hoping to catch the attention of a passing vessel. Days turned into weeks, and their food supplies dwindled to nothing. In a desperate attempt to survive, the crew turned to cannibalism. When help finally came, only 8 of the original 21 crew members survived the harrowing ordeal at sea. The story of the Essex inspired Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick, and remains one of the most chilling and tragic shipwrecks in maritime history. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoy the video, please let us know by clicking the like button, do share, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe.